been with us for the past 5 or so weeks, or if you're new to the program, but I want to welcome you on behalf of Lee Summit Cares and also Rediscover Mental Health. I am Kerri Gray, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And Rachel and I have essentially put these workshops together as an opportunity for folks to gain some information and support and to replace for now our in-person parenting classes that we offer. And so as Rachel indicated, there will be opportunities for you to participate at different parts throughout the workshop. There's no pressure. Participate as much or as little as you would like to. This workshop is being recorded, and so if you get interrupted as you're listening or would like to go back, typically the recording is up on our Lee Summit Cares YouTube channel within about 24 to 48 hours from the time the recording is made. So today our topic is a new normal, which is managing change and uncertainty during difficult times. And so I thought I'd get started by sharing some of the ways in which the Gray family is managing change and uncertainty. And then we're going to have our first poll, which is going to get some feedback from you all. If you're new to joining us, you're going to notice this is my team Gray on the left side of your screen. My husband Phil and I are the bookends, and I have 4 daughters that are right there in the middle. 2 of them are at home with us during our stay at home, and that would be Katie, who is on my immediate left, and then Miss Sammy, who is up front. So how are we dealing with our, being at home and just trying to stay healthy? This is our garage, upper right-hand picture, and my daughter decided that she would like to paint a mural in our garage, and so she has picked out a picture of a barrier reef, and she is going to be working on this, which is fun. And then on the bottom, these are folks at Coldwater, which is one of our local food pantries. And so another thing we did was within our neighborhood, we collected food and donations to give to them, as well as the Summit Social Services. And it did feel good to be doing something, to be able to give back to others within the community. And so here's my question to you. This is our first poll. And the question is, how are you staying healthy? And we've been talking about these throughout the workshops preceding this one. And so Rachel's going to put this up here, and I believe you're able to go ahead and click on as many as you would like to. And so I'll give you a minute to look through that, connecting with family, friends, moving, getting outside, having some type of schedule, but it's a flexible one, trying to eat more healthy foods and less sugary foods. Perhaps you're practicing mindfulness, you're getting good sleep. You might be getting outdoors and gardening, sewing, drawing, just enjoying being creative, pursuing hobbies that maybe you haven't always had time for. And so all of these are essentially excellent ways to stay healthy. And it looks like there's some consistent things that folks are doing that are listening to this webinar. But it looks like almost all of these resources are being utilized in terms of coping strategies. And so as you look at this, just consider these ideas. You might find something new, something that you haven't tried before, that you could, give it a try. The idea is to basically fortify your stress management toolbox with as many ideas as you can. And so thank you for sharing those. And we're going to go ahead and move on with our next part of our workshop, which is essentially dealing with, the change and uncertainty. Now I have an issue here because my slide jumped before I wanted it to. So we're backtracking here. So as we think about life and the different challenges we face in life, I'd like you all to reflect for a minute on our next poll. And this poll is just going to ask you a series of questions. And basically, I'm looking for yes or no. Have you experienced, any of these things? So how many of us have experienced the death of a loved one? A lot of hands will be going up. How many of us have been hurt by a trusted peer? Maybe we've dealt with a miscarriage or infertility. Maybe we have a family member who's struggling with a mental illness. We've lost jobs. Jobs have been redesigned in ways that maybe we weren't really happy with. Social isolation is something that everyone is dealing with. And that list goes on and on. And the reason why I put that list together is because adversity does not discriminate. We all experience pain and suffering as we go through life. And part of that mindset and understanding will help us in being able to negotiate through those challenging times. And so an author that I have been studying has talked about basically our mindset as we deal with these difficult times. This author is Susan David, and she has a lot of wonderful books out there on mindfulness and meaning in life. And what she says is that the discomfort we experience is the price of admission for living a meaningful life. All right. So essentially, we can't live our life without taking both the good and the not so good, the pain and the suffering that comes along with it. If you stop and you reflect on what do you find as meaningful in your life, chances are you think about the people in your life, your family, your friends, the memories that you create together. It might expand into the work that you do, the sense of self-satisfaction that you get in feeling like you're making a difference, that you're utilizing your strengths in a positive way. It could be through hobbies, but there's many ways that we capture meaning through our life. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that life is not always going to run in the way in which we would like it to, as we know. And so we need to be prepared and to deal with the difficult stuff that comes. So here's a quote from Viktor Frankl. I'm sure that you've heard of his name before. Viktor Frankl, he has long passed away, but he was a neurologist as well as a psychiatrist. And what's unique about him is he survived several concentration camps during the Nazi reign. And he went on to essentially reflect on his personal experiences during that time and essentially his mindset that helped him to get through the most challenging situation, we could probably imagine. And so we're going to be looking at some of his thoughts on life and finding meaning in life as we go through this workshop today. But the main point here is that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And the reality is that as we go through life, we have to deal with the good and the bad. And oftentimes things are thrust upon us that we certainly didn't ask for. We call that imposed change. And it's very hard. The natural response to that is going to be, an increase in anxiety. We're resistant to that change. And so we need to keep in mind this. Change is a constant part of our life, and so is uncertainty. People respond to change in different ways. Some of that is reflective on a person's personality type. Some people tend to just go with the flow a little bit easier, while others like a more regimented, predictable type schedule. It also can be influenced by a person's state of health. And so if we're dealing with health issues, that could make us make it more difficult for us to adapt to the changes that are happening. And also certainly the role models, people in our life and how they've dealt with change kind of sets a tone. So there's many things. Those are just a few things that will impact how we as individuals experience change in different ways. As I alluded to in that previous slide, resistance and fear are a normal reaction to change. Let's face it, maybe you have a certain road that you take or to travel to work. And so, we're used to that. We can almost do it on autopilot. And then what happens when you're driving to work and all of a sudden you see a road closed or detour sign? Immediately the anxiety level increases. You're thinking, wait, wait a minute, how am I going to get there? They closed my road. And so that's a natural reaction. When things are different, we are going to respond in that way. And so there's things that we can do to manage those emotions in a healthy way that will help us to navigate through whatever detours, whatever challenges we face. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to stress this. We do not have control over many of the changes that happen in our life, external changes. We didn't ask for COVID-19 to show up in the United States and across the world. We wouldn't ask for someone to, run into us in our car, creating a car accident, if you will. But what we do have control over, and this is what Viktor Frankl was referring to, is we do have control over how we respond to these changes, all right? And so think of it this way. When something happens, we're going to refer to that as the stimulus. And then we have our response. And what happens between the stimulus and response is critical. And we're going to be talking about how to manage that time frame in a healthy way that will make it, teaching those important life skills, not just for yourself, but things that you can model for your kids as well. So we know change is an inevitable part of life, and we know that there's ways that we can think about change that will help to build our personal resilience. And so we know that resilience is essentially our capacity to recover quickly from the difficulties that happen within our life. We want to be resilient because we know the difficulties aren't necessarily going to go away. Now, when you think of this, we're going to start by thinking first about the power of our mind. Our brain is a very powerful tool that can help us to navigate through these difficult times. How we think about the situations that happen around us influences how we feel and then how we act, all right? And so we have to start first by really tuning into our thought processes so that we're not making a knee-jerk reaction. We're being more self-aware and choosing how we're going to react. So a resilient thinker has these three qualities. One is a realistic mindset. The second is the ability to focus their attention. And the third is self-awareness. And so I'm going to dive deeper into each of these in the next few slides, starting with a realistic mindset. So remember, we talked earlier when we were asking how many of you have experienced the loss of a loved one or loss of a job, things like that. We know that joy and suffering are a part of any human existence. And so that's referring back to being a realistic mindset. Things aren't always going to go well. However, as Viktor Frankl said, when stuff happens, I can choose how I'm going to respond. What we find is that people who choose not to take a victim response, which is hard not to do, tend to fare better and are more resilient when difficult things happen or come their way, all right? And so the first critical step is, number one, the freedom of knowing that I am not a victim, that even though this thing has happened and I don't like it one bit, I do have some personal agency, or I do have some level of control within the situation, all right? And so that's important. An example of this is a story that I would tell in working with some clients through a therapy process. And it's a story of a man who was walking through the park when he noticed another man who was sitting on a bench with his dog close by. As he was walking by, he could hear that the dog was whimpering and whining and crying. And the gentleman who walked by asked, "Hey, is that your dog?" And the man on the bench said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, why is he crying?" And the man said, "Well, it's because he's sitting on a tack." And the guy said, "Well, why doesn't he just get up and walk away?" And the man said, "Well, you know, when it's bothering him enough, he's going to get up and move." All right. And so the point of that story is that while we can't avoid the pain and the suffering in our life, we can choose how to respond to it in ways that ease that pain and suffering. And so sometimes a person has to be incredibly miserable before they're ready to take action. And so think, you know, in terms of choices and personal agency. Another thing we know that helps along the journey is a hopeful attitude. That's something that will help you to navigate through the tough times. And that is the attitude that, you know, I've dealt with challenges in my past, really difficult times where I didn't know how I was going to get through it. I felt incredibly overwhelmed, yet here I am, and I did get through it. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it this time, but I know that I can, and I have the ability to do that. So having that hopeful attitude, even though when we don't have all the answers, being able to look back at past challenges and utilize some of the things that we did then can help us as we continue to move forward. So we had, the first one was the realistic mindset that, you know, pain and suffering are a part of, you know, the admission to living a meaningful life. But we also have focused attention. And how this works is basically the idea is that you want to choose carefully where you focus your attention. Oftentimes we spend a great deal of time focusing on things that we have absolutely no control over. An example of that would be other people. We might think that we can control other people, but the reality is the only person whom we truly can control is ourselves. And some might argue it would depend on how many cups of coffee they've had, what kind of sleep they've had, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we think of where we're focusing our attention, a good question to ask ourselves is, what do I have control over here? You know, what do I need to let go of that I really don't have any control over? All right. You know, so let's say that you have a teenager who is moping around the house and, you know, just is miserable, which is understandable, you know, given the situation that we're dealing with and the losses that our kids are experiencing. We need to be very empathetic about that. And we need to listen, and we need to see if and what we can do to help. But the reality is that our kids also can learn to deal with disappointment and other uncomfortable feelings and get out on the other side and know, you know what, I can do this. I can deal with the good, I can deal with the bad, I can deal with the things that come along. And so with the teenager, we can be there to listen and to help out where we can. But the reality is, you know, sometimes they just need to have some time to think and decide what they're going to do. All right. Another aspect of focused attention is to don't ignore the negative, but to choose to focus on the positive. All right. We have a tendency to want to suppress negative feelings, and I'm going to get into that in future slides here. But that's really not a good idea for many reasons. And so as we tune into our focused attention on the mental chatter that goes on in our heads, which we all have, we need to be mindful of, you know, what is it that I'm focusing my attention on? You know, is it only the negative things, or am I choosing to put a spotlight on more positive things? And the reality is, one of the things that we can do through a focused attention exercise is to train our brain to focus on more positive aspects, even in the most challenging of opportunities. And this is something that Viktor Frankl got very good at doing at. So how this works, and actually there was some research done. If you would like to engage in this activity, it can be done as an individual as well as something you could do with your family. And so we train our brain by writing down 3 positive things each day that happened, all right? And so it could be something as simple as, today I woke up and I made an excellent cup of coffee. That was a wonderful cup of coffee. Another thing might be, I got to go outside, the sun was shining, and I felt the warmth on my skin, and that felt really good. It could be, my kids weren't fighting as much today. That's a positive thing. It's essentially anything, but it's giving your brain permission and intentionally choosing to focus on the good in spite of an uncertain or challenging situation that you're in, all right? And what we found is that when individuals did this every day, 3 positive things over the course of 6 months, they found significant increases in their gratitude and their overall happiness, and a decreases in depression. So you can actually train your brain by developing neural pathways by doing this specific activity. Some families choose to go ahead and make a poster board and make it a family experience to write down things that have been positive about that day. So it's a visual reminder. Some people just, do it through their own personal journal. And so that's something to think about, an idea for you. Now, the third piece of the resilient thought process is self-awareness, all right? When we think in terms of our actions as we respond to a difficult, situation, we need to ask ourselves if what I'm doing is helping me or harming me, all right? We don't have control over many of the things that happen externally, but how we respond, we need to ask ourselves that question. Is this something that's helping me or is it harming me? And so when we look specifically, at COVID, could it be helping you? If you look at the left side and the right side, I have some suggestions on things that could be helpful and things that we often do that are not helpful, which I refer to as harmful. If you would like to participate, what you can do is put some of your thoughts in the chat box as we look at different things that people around you might do, things that of that people do that are considered helpful, but also harmful. So let's look at the first one here. So we're looking at limiting my exposure to the news. That's probably going to be helpful. Having some type of daily routine. Earlier, many of you mentioned you're doing that. Spending time outdoors. And so those are things that we can do that are likely to ease our anxiety, our fear, kind of put some dopamine into our body to help us feel better. Now, things that would be considered unhelpful would be brooding over all the things I can't do, all right? And so it's like, man, I can't be with my friends. I can't go to my favorite store. I can't, and even though those things are really, those are real and those are big disappointments, spending our time focusing on the things we can't do is really more harmful than it is helpful. When I refer to catastrophic thinking, sometimes something bad will happen and then we automatically take it to the worst case scenario. And pretty soon something small has turned into something tremendously big. And so we need to be tuned in and self-aware of how we're thinking about the things that are happening. Uncertainty, our brain naturally wants us to have answers. And so we have to be careful not to go to that worst case scenario. I'm stressed out, yelling at my kids. Is this something that's helpful or harmful? It's probably harmful because then I feel guilty about doing that. And I, have to apologize and work to help mend that relationship. Now, as I'm looking at my screen, my chat box is not popping up. So I'm going to ask Rachel throughout this presentation that if people are commenting, that I will pause and have her share any of those comments. And so
Christy mentioned that she uses the Rachel Hollis planner, and it helps her set goals each day, write down what will make me stronger that day and something that I'm grateful for. That sounds neat. I haven't seen the Rachel Hollis planner.
Excellent. I like it. So this planner actually incorporates some of the things that we're already talking about. I'll have to look for that. Yes, how about on the harming side? Did anyone have?
Christy was.
I was just going to say that it also makes you kind of evaluate your week at the end of every week and say what you were grateful for that week that you accomplished and what you could do better in the next week and things like that. So at the end of every week, you have to evaluate how you did and what you're going to do to make the next week better.
Wow. That sounds like a fantastic tool. And where did you pick that up?
So it's sold at Target and it's only while supplies are in stock. So she just came out with a new planner, I think maybe about a week and a half ago. And then once they're sold out, they're gone till she comes out with a new edition.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for sharing that. If you wouldn't mind typing the name of the planner in the chat box, that way people will know exactly what it is, should they decide to head to Target and check it out. Thank you. Appreciate that. And so, the self-awareness and just being aware of, is my thought process helping me or is it harming me? And so being aware of that. Now, as we move forward, I want to make sure that I stay on target with our time. One of the things as we dive deeper into our emotions, one of the things that we find is people tend to deal with complicated emotions in one of three ways. One would be that they would judge the feeling as either being a good feeling or a bad feeling. All right. As Americans, we want to focus only on the positive things that are happening. You look at Facebook posts and things like that, and we're not sharing the under the surface stuff that's happening to all of us because everybody is dealing with the challenging, but rather we want to put out our best appearance forward. And so there's pressure there to just focus on the positive and ignore the not so positive, which is actually impossible. And we'll talk about that as we move further. The second response is to brood or the negative, which we kind of started touching on in the previous slide. And that would be that example of, why me? Why now? What's next? The snowball effect, if you will. That goes back to that worst case scenario that we need to catch ourselves getting into that mental chatter and stop it. A third thing that people often do is to stuff or deny those uncomfortable feelings. Just because they're not comfortable. We don't want to deal with it. And so I put some humor in here with something that I found on, I think it was a Facebook post. It says, don't forget to drink water and get sun. You're basically a houseplant with complicated emotions. And I'm thinking, boy, isn't that the truth? We are having to learn how to deal with a lot of complicated emotions. And when you think of yourself as a parent, oftentimes what we want to do is fix that. We want to jump in right away and say, you know what, it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Look at the bright side, which there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's helpful for us to teach and to show our kids how to move through those difficult feelings as part of their experience just to acknowledge, yeah, you know, I have disappointment, and I can see where you're feeling lonely. And so acknowledging that those feelings are just part of our human existence and labeling them will help us to move to the next step, which is then, how do I choose to act, which we're going to come to. Now, this is making me want a donut. I don't know about you, but oftentimes I had mentioned that the third strategy is to stuff our feelings. And this is truly not sustainable. All right. And so my question is, you know, I'm somebody who likes donuts, and at our church, they have these awesome glazed chocolate covered donuts with sprinkles, right? And I'm also someone who, you know, wants to be physically fit. And so I know that's probably not something that's good, you know, for me to be eating real regularly, even if it's on Sundays. I don't know. And so what happens then is I might tell myself, all right, this Sunday, I'm not going to have a donut. And when you tell yourself, when you deny yourself in that way, I'm not even going to think about the donut, I'm not even going to go over there. For many people, that amplifies the thing you're trying not to think about. All right. So when I try not to think about the donut or these, you know, feelings that I'm having, they tend to amplify themselves. And now I really want 2 donuts. And so keep that in mind in terms of how our mind works. Another example would be a beach ball. You know, if you push a ball underwater, and we'll use that as those uncomfortable, complicated feelings, eventually it's going to pop out. And so it will pop out maybe with you snapping at a loved one or a family member. You know, it will pop out or leak out, if you will, as not being able to sleep at night, or maybe you'll notice it in your stomach, or maybe you're going to feel that tension, you know, behind your head and your shoulders, or your headache. And so it's really, truly impossible to deny the uncomfortable feelings. It's most healthy for us physically and mentally to just acknowledge that we have them, and then to do about it. We've got to name it to tame it. You may have heard that phrase before. And so how do we do this? This goes back to the author that I quoted earlier about the meaning of life. In her book, Get Unstuck, Embrace Change, one of the quotes that really stood out to me is, instead of focusing on what you should feel, focus on what you do feel. All right. People who have what she refers to as emotional agility, which is the ability to experience a full range of emotions, right? Not just the ones that are feel-good emotions, tend to be more resilient, especially when things are challenging. People who have that ability to experience a full range of emotions are healthier mentally and physically, because our mental health is related to our physical health. And so how do we do that? You know, what's the guide posts for doing that? And so she goes on to say that we experience a full range of emotions in ways that are compassionate. So think of being your own best friend, curious, but also value-based. And that value-based then turns into an understanding of why we're feeling a certain way, probably because a value is being compromised, and what action can we take to deal with it, which is also ties back to our values, and that's going to be different, you know, for all of us. And so just to recap where we are so far in this presentation. So remember, between stimulus and response, there is a place, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And our response lies our growth and our freedom. All right. So many things in life are going to happen that we have absolutely zero control over. But in that space, we can reflect on the feelings that we're having in a non-judgmental way, and consider why we're angry or upset or sad, and then choose what is the action? What can I control? What can I do within this situation? And so here are those questions that I should have put this up sooner. What am I feeling? Without judgment. All right. There's no such thing as good or bad feelings. We have a wide range of emotions, but also I want you to know that you are not an emotion. And so when somebody says, I am mad, well, you're not mad per se, but you're experience a feeling of anger right now. All right. And so that's how we label that, that emotion or feeling that we're having. Then once we identify why perhaps we're feeling angry, we do this with a curious mind. So what is it telling you about something that you value? Maybe you have a teenager who is angry because he or she is not able to connect with their peers in a way that they used to be able to. So what does that tell us about that value of the teenager? Well, they value relationships. They value time with other people. So then the next question is, what can I do about it, right? If I can't be with someone face to face, what are some courageous steps that I can take? How might I still connect with these folks? And so think about the 3 questions as you focus in on your self-awareness. What am I feeling? And there's no judgment. Why am I feeling this way? Be curious about it. What is it telling you? And then what can I do about it? Where do I have personal agency? Stephen Covey, where is my locus of control? And that's acknowledging what you can and can't control. So I put in some examples, and we're getting more towards the end of the workshop now. So I have some different application things to look at. So the first step when we look at uncertainty during difficult times, what am I feeling? Well, I reflected on this for myself because I have 2 kids here at home, and I'm feeling a little bit anxious about the future. I'm wondering, is it safe for my kids to participate in sports? I have a daughter who swims for Southern Illinois University. Is it safe to send her back even when they say it is? Will my 14-year-old be able to participate safely in activities this summer? That's what I'm feeling, and that's a legitimate feeling. So why am I feeling this way? Well, maybe I'm feeling sad for my kids because they've already missed a lot, and I know the mental health benefits of getting out and being with their peers. So what can I do about it? All right, so we're thinking value-based. Well, if I have a real high anxiety about safety, I can involve my kids in making alternate plans. And so even if something is offered, I alone will get to decide with my husband and, the family, what we will do and what we're not going to do, depending on the safety protocols and my own thoughts and feelings, okay? And so that might look at maybe making different plans, planning some fun weekend trips, for the family, just experiencing some things maybe that we haven't experienced before. And so that would be an example of that. Another one, another parent, or I might think, if I want to get them back to activities, I will go and research what's available and see what they're doing to follow safety protocols, and so there's different options based on your values and your own individual experience. I try to tell people there is no one right way to COVID, and there is no one right way to live life. We each have a value set, and so we want to live by those values, and so our decisions may look different, and that's perfectly natural and a good thing. So here we have our first group activity if you would like to participate. And essentially, here's our scenario. You are feeling anxious and overwhelmed as COVID uncertainty continues. You notice that these feelings intensify when you go to your news feed. So remember, the first question we're going to ask is, what am I feeling? And we know we're feeling anxious and overwhelmed. So why then, second question, why am I feeling this way? This is where we have the curious mind. And so you think in terms of your own life and why this is maybe keeping you up at night or making you feel sick to your stomach. You know, what is your individual worry, or what is the value or the thing that you're not able to do? Then here's where we have to really stop. This is where our change can occur. Then is what I'm doing helping or harming me? Okay. And so if we go back to the example of spending lots of time on a news feed, you know, but we're aware that our anxiety is increasing tremendously as we are doing that, obviously that's harming me. All right. And so if it's something that's harming, what can you do differently? And so here's some examples to get some different value-based ideas. If you would like to go ahead and comment in the chat box. And so we can look at, you know, instead of ruminating about what we're not able to do and what could happen, you know, what could we do differently that would be more helpful in easing anxiety? And so I'm not, at this point, I'm not seeing any comments there, and that's okay. And that could go back to some of those things that we referred to earlier in terms of what are we doing to stay healthy during this time, you know, where maybe we're putting some limits on how much we watch the news, or maybe we're picking up the phone and calling someone just to share our stresses, our anxieties, or maybe there's a book or something that we could pick up and read that we enjoy. And so there's no right way. The important thing is the question, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? So let's move on. If I can, here we go. So here's a next one, and I kind of brought this up a little bit earlier with an example. I think, you know, one of the hardest things for me personally with the social isolation is, you know, the social distancing, which is really what I would refer to as physical distancing, right? You may know that a person can truly be with a huge group of people and still feel lonely, right? And so the key is making those meaningful connections. We make meaningful connections in order to decrease those feelings of loneliness. So it's how we're connected, not really how big of the group or who is available to us. And so our next scenario is a situation where your child is upset and says, I can't do this anymore. I want to be with my friends. All right. And so question number one, what is he or she feeling? All right. And so if you'd like, you could put some comments in the chat box, or you could just listen and follow in. And it's important not to minimize those feelings or to brush them off and say, oh, it's just going to be fine. Or, you know, you're not alone. You know, people are dealing with much worse things than you. That's not helpful. That would be an example of, you know, stuffing or denying those feelings. And so that doesn't help a child to process through or move forward. So instead, we try to identify what he or she is feeling at that time. We might even ask him or her, you know, what is bothering you the most? All right. Not being with your friends anymore. It could be maybe they were really looking forward to the prom, you know, and getting that dress and, you know, taking pictures and just all the rituals that went out with that. Okay. So what is she or he feeling? And then what does it tell you about your child and what he or she values? And so with this one, obviously we're going back to those social connections. So is what your child doing helping or harming? Now, this is tricky because, you know, tweens and teens and kids can be they don't necessarily think, process, problem solve, but rather they are more vulnerable to becoming overwhelmed with emotion. And that's simply because their brains are immature. And as, you know, when they're younger, they're more drawn to experiencing emotions differently than we as adults do, okay? And so when you talk to your child, teen, about this, you might ask them, what are you doing because of this, and is it something that's kind of helping, or is it making it worse? And chances are they might be ruminating about all the things that they're missing, rather than moving on to the next question, and that is, what can your child do about it? So thinking about what are some small steps you can take to connect in another way. And so, Zoom calls, phone technology, there's different things that they can do and are doing in order to stay connected that way, at least, until, we can ease more social restrictions. But that's just a template for something that we've been dealing with. But the main things, what are we feeling? What does it tell us about what we value? And what are we doing in response? Is it something that's truly helping me, or is it causing me more pain and suffering? I'm going to wrap up with this final quote that says, "Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear." And so when we move into that action step, we might have to step into things that are unfamiliar to us, that are uncomfortable because of that. And so through that, that's where courage comes from, is just the willingness to take those steps and to do something differently. For me, from a parenting perspective and the parenting programs that I do, I see the goal. The goal is not to protect our youth from life's challenges, but rather to prepare them by teaching them healthy ways to navigate through difficult times. And that is done by helping them to experience a wide range of emotions and helping them to identify those and be curious about those feelings as they then choose and think about how they want to respond. Is it something that's helping me, or is it hurting me? I do have personal agency here. And so, so this essentially concludes the information that, to share with you today. I do want to pause and see if there's anyone who has any questions that you would like to ask before we wrap up and sign off for the day. Okay, so now I'm starting to see some things show up in my chat box, and I apologize for not acknowledging this sooner, folks. I haven't been able to get it to come up. So I see some things with regarding just how the kids were feeling sad, that they value friendships and relationships. Someone else indicated the last 2 nights I've had a terrible time getting sleep. What can I do? Socializing. Okay. And so maybe when we go to that questions about, a terrible time falling to sleep, one of the things that I would do is take a look at what you are doing leading up to bedtime. Because what we do leading up to bedtime can help to put us in a better, sleep state, if you will. And so certainly limiting our caffeine, but thinking back to the time, where we had little kids and we would do things to calm down, the environment, to slow things down, taking a hot bath, some people drink tea, turning off the news, turning off the screen, maybe picking up a book or something that you enjoy. But there's several things that we can do to help us ourselves to wind down. And then what I recommend to folks then who wake up is to, consider what they're feeling. Is there a feeling that you're experiencing in your stomach that's causing you to wake up? And we experience our feelings in different body places, if you will, to write that down. And then to consider why, that curious mind, that curious attitude, why am I feeling this way? And then we can start thinking about, okay, what can I control? Where is my center of influence here? What are some small pieces, small things that I can do in response to whatever this is that I'm feeling? So that's a great, great question. Christy says, acknowledge their feelings and try to talk through them or make a point to go outside and play with them. Yeah, you know, acknowledging their feelings and even sharing that you too as a parent, you know, have been feeling a little anxious or whatnot, but you know what, we're going to get through this. I don't know when, you know, we're going to return to business as usual. We don't have those answers, but we eventually will. And we might even share with our kids about things that we've done, you know, in the past to get through uncertain times. That can be helpful. I love it. You know, take a break, go outside and play. Will you show this again because I came in late? Yes, we are actually recording this. And Rachel already answered your questions. So yes, you will be able to go back to this and tune in at your convenience. So if you have any other questions, you can certainly email them to me at my Rediscover address, kjgray@rediscovermh.org. Rachel, who I want to thank for helping with our technology this evening, she will be sending out an evaluation. We're always looking for ways to improve the program, see what you want more of, less of. I hope you take some time to complete that evaluation. And finally, Lee Summit Cares parenting programs are funded through private and public donors. So if you are able to make a donation and would like to towards these types of programs, you certainly can do that. And you can do that through visiting the leesummitcares.org website. And they have more information there on this and all the other programs that we offer through Lee Summit Cares. Now, as we wrap up, I just want to get a date on your calendar. You'll be getting some information soon about this. Tuesday, June 9th at 4 p.m. will be our next webinar, and we're going to be focusing on mindfulness. Essentially, we started to touch on this a little bit through our thought and self-awareness processes, but how we deal with our inner world, and we have a very active inner world, drives everything. And so I want to talk about what mindfulness is. We know it is not a religion, but essentially we're going to talk about it, how it can benefit you, and you'll learn some simple practices that can help you live your best life regardless of any circumstance. And so another tool for your toolbox and something that you can also share with your kids. So I hope that you've had an enjoyable experience today. I hope you will join us in the future. And again, this has been recorded as well as the 5 preceding evaluation, or not evaluations, but presentations. So if you would like to go back and listen in on those, they are at the Lee Summit Cares YouTube channels. So get on YouTube, Google Lee Summit Cares, and you can listen to the other webinars at a time that's most convenient to you. So I'm going to sign off, and I want to thank you all for joining us, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day and a very enjoyable Memorial Day weekend. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.